When I bought an abandoned mill lake at the edge of town, I thought I was buying a forgotten piece of property. I didn't know I was buying the biggest headache the local HOA had ever seen. The lake had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. The old mill was gone. The access road was cracked and overgrown, and nobody had maintained the shoreline in years. But the property came with something the HOA never expected: a perfectly valid deed. I bought the land through a county auction, checked the records, paid the taxes, and walked away believing the deal was finished. Then, 3 weeks later, a white SUV pulled through my gate. A woman stepped out wearing a bright blue HOA vest. She introduced herself as Karen Miller, president of the Nearby Homeowners Association. Then she looked at the lake and said, "You'll need to remove your gate." I asked her why. She pointed toward the water. "This lake is part of our community's common area." I almost laughed. I told her I'd purchased the property legally. She smiled. "You may have purchased the land around it, but the lake belongs to the neighborhood." That was the first time I realized something was seriously wrong. I asked her to show me the document proving the HOA owned the lake. She said she'd have their attorney send it. 2 days later, I received an email. Attached was a 20-year-old community map. Karen claimed the map proved the lake was intended for neighborhood use. But there was one problem. A neighborhood map isn't the same thing as a deed. And when I checked the county records, I found something even more interesting. The original mill company had sold the entire property decades earlier. The lake, the shoreline, the access road, everything. And the property had eventually ended up in county foreclosure. That's how I bought it. The HOA apparently knew none of this. Or maybe they knew and hoped I didn't. Either way, Karen wasn't backing down. One Saturday morning, I arrived at the lake and found 6 cars parked along my private access road. About 15 people were sitting beside the water. They had brought folding chairs, fishing equipment, coolers, and even a portable grill. Karen stood in the middle of them. I asked what they were doing. She looked at me and said, "It's Community Lake Day." I told everyone they were on private property. Karen rolled her eyes. Then she said something that made my jaw drop. "You can't just buy a lake and decide who gets to use it." I replied, "Actually, I can if I own it." That's when she called the sheriff. She apparently believed the sheriff would make me leave. 10 minutes later, a patrol vehicle arrived. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out. He looked at the group, then at me, then at the old gate. Karen immediately started explaining her version of the story. She claimed the lake belonged to the HOA and that I was interfering with community access. The sheriff listened quietly. Then he turned to me. "Do you have your deed?" I handed him a folder. Inside was the original purchase paperwork, county auction records, tax documents, and a recorded deed. Sheriff Brooks opened the folder. He studied the first page, then the second. Then he looked at the county parcel number. His expression changed. He asked Karen, "Do you have anything showing the HOA owns this property?" Karen confidently pulled out her community map. The sheriff looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then he handed it back. "This isn't a deed." Karen insisted that the lake had always been used by the neighborhood. The sheriff nodded. "I understand that." Then he pointed toward my paperwork. "But usage doesn't establish ownership." The entire group went silent. Karen tried one more argument. She claimed homeowners had been fishing there for years. The sheriff looked at her. "That may be true." Then he added, "But right now, the county records show the property belongs to him." That sentence changed everything. People started packing their chairs. The grill disappeared. Fishing poles went back into trucks. And suddenly the lake was quiet again. But Karen wasn't finished. The next week, the HOA sent me a formal demand. They wanted permanent access to the lake. They also wanted the right to hold community events there. And their offer? Nothing. They wanted me to give them access to the entire lake for free. I refused. My attorney reviewed their documents and discovered something else. Years earlier, the HOA had collected money from residents for maintaining the lake. But the HOA had never actually owned it. They had been maintaining property that belonged to someone else. That didn't give them ownership. It just made their situation even more embarrassing. Eventually, the HOA backed down. The access road was closed. The old gate was repaired. And for the first time in decades, the abandoned mill lake finally had an owner who actually cared about it. I cleaned up the shoreline, removed trash, repaired the dock, and planted trees around the water. I didn't turn it into a private resort. I simply restored what had been forgotten. Months later, I was standing beside the lake at sunset when Sheriff Brooks drove by. He stopped for a moment and rolled down his window. He looked at the restored shoreline and smiled. "Looks a lot better than when we first met." I laughed. "Yeah, and nobody's trying to take it anymore." He nodded, probably because they finally read the deed. And that's a lesson I learned. A property can be forgotten. It can be abandoned. It can even be used by a neighborhood for years. But none of that automatically changes who legally owns it. The HOA thought they could take my lake simply because everyone had gotten used to using it. They were wrong. And the moment the sheriff saw my deed, the entire story changed. If you enjoyed this HOA story, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?